Hi there, Hushings here. I'll be breaking down Raiden Shogun's whole kit, making it easy to understand for you, roles she might be able to fill, and how strong she is going to be. There's going to be some math involved, but don't worry, I've made it super simple for you. Raiden Shogun, aka Baal, ascends with energy recharge instead of elemental damage now, which is actually a really good change, because Baal has high energy recharge requirements, and the more ER she gets, the more electro damage she gets through one of her passives. So instead of building ER in artifacts and being stuck with innate electro damage, now it is possible to build less ER in artifacts and into more crit stats, which is way better than electro damage. Her base attack is also very high at 337, actually higher than that of Ganryu and the Luke, and we will see how these amazing base stats come into play in a bit. Her skill, Her Majesty's Judgy Eye, is one of her main supportive tools. It does a decent amount of initial damage and summons an eye that follows you. When you are carrying the eye and hitting opponents, it will unleash a coordinated attack to slash the same target through space and time, dealing AoE electro damage. This coordinated attack can happen every 0.9 seconds and generates energy half of the time it hits. It will generate on average 10 to 11 particles over 20 seconds as long as you keep attacking things, which is pretty generous considering the eye lasts 25 seconds before you have to cast it again. It works similarly to Albedo's skill, but the eye follows your character around so you don't have to waste time repositioning it, and that off-field ability would also be able to trigger it, which I think are amazing features. Maybe we would even be able to snipe enemies from across the map and the Judgy Eye would still be able to slash them. Wouldn't be the most practical thing, but sure will be fun. And did I mention this ability does over 1500% damage over 20 seconds? Yeah, her skill hits harder than a lot of ults. But there's one more very important effect in her skill. That is when the Judgy Eye is in effect, your team's ults get a damage bonus that scales with their energy cost. For example, at talent level 10, the bonus would be 0.3% for each energy, so a 40 energy ult would receive a 12% damage bonus, a 60 energy ult would get an 18% buff, and an 80 energy ult would receive a 24% damage bonus. This is incredibly powerful because the most impactful, high damage ults are usually locked behind 80 energy, and these ults gets the biggest boost in damage. And speaking of high impact ults, Raiden Shogun's own ult would get a 27% bonus in damage because it is going to cost 90 energy. But don't get intimidated by it because Raiden generates more energy than anyone else in the game. She not only generates a ton of particles from her skill and ascends with energy recharge, her Ascension 4 passive converts each percent of energy recharge you build on her into 0.4% electro damage percent. So building more ER actually gives you more damage. And on top of all of that, her ult has a special mechanic that recharges a ton of energy for your whole team, including herself. And speaking of her ult, this is going to be one of the most broken things in the game. When you cast Raiden's ult, she draws her Musou no Hitotachi, dealing a massive burst of AoE electro damage. Then she uses Musou Ishin, wielding her Tachi in combat for 7 seconds, converting all of her attacks into electro and cannot be overridden. The damage of the initial burst and her Musou Ishin attacks can be increased immensely by the amount of resolve stacks she has gained. More on this mechanic later. And under a recent change, both parts of her ult, the initial damage and the damage from her Tachi, are considered ultimate damage, which means all of their damage can be buffed by Bao's own skill and the Noblesse set and the new emblem set. Her Musou Ishin attacks have higher multipliers than her normal ones as well, and her charge attack consumes less stamina under the effect. And because these attacks use their own multipliers listed under her ult, you don't even have to level up her normal attack talents, saving you some valuable resources. Her attacks look like they're slashing through space, and they're incredibly beautiful, smooth, and fluid as well. And back to Resolve, her ult damage is increased by stacks of Resolve, which maxes out at 60 stacks. At talent level 10, each stack gives you 7% extra damage to your ult, which is 420% extra damage at max stacks, casually quadrupling the ult's initial damage, instantly deleting whatever is in her path, and the enemies that can withstand the initial burst wouldn't be able to stand long after either, because each Resolve stack also provides her with 0.87% extra damage to her Musou Ishin attacks, which amounts to 52.2% at max stacks. The base multiplier or base power of these attacks are slightly lower than Keqing's, but as long as you've generated some resolve stacks, and remember these attacks can be boosted by the emblem set and Bao's own skill, these attacks are going to hit really hard. As to how resolve stacks are gained, there are two methods. At talent level 10, every energy your team uses for casting ults will generate 0.2 resolve. A 40 energy ult would generate 8 resolve, a 60 energy ult would generate 12 resolve, and an 80 energy ult would generate 16 resolve. The second way is through Baal's A1 passive. When a teammate obtains energy particles, 2 resolve is gained, and this effect can be triggered every 3 seconds. Assuming you are getting a steady influx of energy, which you can pretty easily, with Raiden Shogun's skill, you can trigger the effect 4 to 6 times every rotation, which is 8 to 12 stacks. Here I have a chart that counts resolve stacks, and because the Shogun's own ult doesn't count towards resolve, you'll need 3 teammates with 80 energy ults to fully charge the 60 resolve. Though if you have 160 energy ult, then you would still get 56 stacks, and if you delay your ult cast by 1 second, you would trigger the A1 passive one more time to get to 58 stacks. And if you're delaying the Shogun's ult a bit instead of using it on cooldown, then you would be able to gain more stacks from the A1 passive as well, so getting to max or near max stacks is relatively achievable, unlike our beloved Captain Eula, which has half her stacking potential locked behind her last constellation. And if you are building the Shogun as a pure support and don't care about her damage, you don't need to care about resolve stacks at all. But if you are worried how on earth you are supposed to charge those expensive ults for your whole team, I have great news for you. But before things get too messy, so far we have covered the damage capabilities of the Shogun's ult, and now we are onto its supportive capabilities. As if all the damage isn't enough already. When the attacks of Mushoishin hit opponents, it will generate energy for every team member and can be triggered 5 times through the duration of the buff. The amount of energy gained increases as your talent levels increase, up to 2.5 energy every trigger at talent level 10. At first glance, this seems very low, but after looking deeper into it, oh boy, it is going to be one of the most broken things in the game. The amount of energy gained through this method can actually be boosted by her second part of her Ascension 4 passive. For each 1% of ER above 100, aka the ones in your build from weapons and artifacts, grants her 0.6% more energy restoration from the effects of Mushoishin. For example, if you have a total of 200% ER on the Shogun, she will generate 60% more energy when Mushoishin procs, regenerating 2.5 times 1.6 equals 4 energy, and because we can proc the effect 5 times, we multiply that by 5 for a total of 20 energy generated basically out of thin air for every single one of your teammates. For example, we have Beidou on the team, and she requires 180% ER to regenerate her 80 cost ult to cast it on cooldown. After generating some energy on the Shogun, Beidou's new ER requirement will now be 135% instead, which is around 8 substats worth of stats that can now go into attack percent or crit rate and crit damage. Based on that, you can gain 27% crit rate or 54% crit damage, which is almost as much as you would get from an artifact piece. Imagine slapping on an extra crit rate or crit damage circlet onto every single member on your team. That's a lot of damage. It would make casting expensive but powerful ults easier. The ults generate resolve stacks, the stacks amplify Raiden Shogun's own damage, everything gets deleted, and the cycle goes round and round. And during the effects of Mushoishin, Baal's resistance is also increased, so you wouldn't get knocked around as easily and becomes immune to Electro charge effects, so you can't get stunned, which will cost you precious time, which are good quality of life features. It also doesn't say swapping causes the effects to go away, so it might work like no else all. Before I tell you exactly how to maximize her potential, what kind of playstyle she is going to fill, and how strong she is going to be, if I've helped you out so far, give the like button a boop so this video spreads to more people, and comment Shogun come home for some good luck. And now, allow me to touch on the Shogun's constellations real quick because you might get lucky or have a bunch of Primogems saved up for her. And there are some traps in here. Her C1 increases resolve stacks you get from ult cast of your team. If we look at this chart here, it makes it easier to get full stacks of resolve, making your team building more flexible, but it would be overkill sometimes, especially if you are running 2 Electro characters. Her C2 makes her attacks ignore 60% of enemies' defense. Although it only benefits herself, it's an enormous defense strat which definitely helps her damage. And if you are playing main DPS Baal, this would be amazing. Her C3 increases ult damage only because its utility is kept at T10, so you're only getting damage past that point. Her C4 provides a huge attack percent buff for your other teammates, which is a ton of stats. It's just incredible. Her C5 gives a bit more damage from her skill, but not by much. Her C6 makes her Mushoishin attacks decrease the ult cooldown of your other teammates up to 5 seconds. It's an interesting effect, but I don't think it's actually that useful because because your typical rotation would be 15 to 20 seconds, where the Shogun takes 1 second to cast her skill, 2 seconds to cast her ult, 7 seconds to hit things in her ult, and that's 10 seconds gone already. Now you're left with 5 seconds, which is not quite enough for everyone to cast their skills and ults, because they're going to each spend 2 to 3 seconds on field. There might be some comps that can use this effectively, but it's not generally useful.
Wait a minute. This is actually way better than I thought, because you would cast everyone's ult first, switch to the Shogun to do her thing, then you can cast everyone's ults again. You would need more ER on everyone because you have less time to battery, but more ults equal more damage.
TLDR, C1 and C6 are situationally good, C2 and C4 are amazing, and the others are just alright. And now onto the Shogun's playstyle. I think we are being trapped in a box here, thinking because the first 2 Archons are supports, all other Archons are going to be supports, and because Baal doesn't scale with crit stats, she's just a support or a sub DPS. But as I was looking at these juicy numbers here, I realized that her best playstyle sits on the blurry line between main DPS and sub DPS. Let me explain. The Shogun deals a huge amount of damage, but she has to be on field to deal a big part of it, unlike Xiangling or Beidou, our traditional burst DPS. And considering that her field time will be around 9 to 10 seconds, and her ult cooldown will be 18 seconds, she takes the same amount of field time as say Yoimiya or Eula would. Plus the fact that her damage is potentially on par with our traditional DPS characters, even though she ascends with ER, thanks to her own buffs and high multipliers, and huge front-loaded burst damage that would be higher than Hu Tao and Eula, but also with the ability to accelerate your ults and buff your team-wide damage as well, makes for a very scary Shogun. If that was a bit too confusing, all I'm saying is her damage is going to match traditional DPS's while providing more utility, as long as you can keep her ult charged. The general playstyle of a Baal team would start with using her skill, cast the skill and bursts of the rest of your team, charging up the resolve, then switch to Baal for her ult for a big burst of damage, along with some decently strong normal and charge attacks to clean up the enemies, and regenerate some energy for the team, repeat if necessary. And this resembles a traditional team with Baal as the main DPS. An other option is to slot in your Eula or whatever DPS you want and use Baal as a sub DPS or battery, but be aware that she is going to take way more time to do her job than a typical support would, potentially making your whole rotation much longer, but your big numbers are going to be bigger because of Baal's skill, and you would still benefit from Baal's damage and energy generation. If you just press EQ on Baal, then you are missing out on a ton of damage and energy, which is not quite optimal. But there really is no right or wrong, there's only if you enjoy it or not, and if you can clear abyss with it or not, so do whatever you want. MiHoYo has been blurring the lines of main DPS and supports anyways. Some of our DPS characters also have the ability to buff your team, and the Shogun might just be another step in that direction. But then, the biggest downside of the Shogun is that she is going to be really reliant on her ult. You need to guarantee you can generate the energy she needs to ult, because if you are relying on her to fuel your whole team's energy, missing an ult on Baal would mean missing everyone's ult as well, and the Shogun's own DPS is also gone. Kinda like Xiao, who hits like a wet noodle without his ult, but worse than Xiao because you probably would have left Baal's normal attack talent at level 1. However, you would be rewarded if you build just enough ER on her. And unfortunately, the Shogun is also going to be way less universal than Fenty and Zhongli because you have to build a team around her if you want to play her as a DPS, and very few teams right now can let a support or a second DPS take 10 seconds of field time and not lose damage. So if you have a flex spot in your team and want some extra ult damage and Bennett is taken, maybe you can slot her in. People with higher infested supports would definitely feel like their Shogun is better because she can amplify their damage. 0 times 2,000,000% is still 0.
So if you haven't built your support, now would be a good time to do so.
As you can see, she has some specific use cases, will have one of if not the best burst potential in the game, and some buffs and energy for your team. For that, I rate her a situationally OP over Ganyu. Okay, bye!